A Byzantine soldier stands at dusk on the edge of a plateau in southern Syria, looking west. Below him, the ground simply disappears. The gorge of Wadi ar-Ruqqad cuts through the earth like something too deep to be natural. 200 meters down, sheer on both sides, the kind of drop that makes a man take one careful step back before he even realizes he's done it. He is not afraid of it. He is grateful for it. His sandal scrapes loose gravel over the edge, and he doesn't bother watching it fall. Somewhere behind him, tents are going up in long rows, cook fires are catching, and the low murmur of thousands of men settling in for the night carries across the plateau like something almost peaceful. For 6 days in August of the year 636, this ravine will sit at the edge of the largest Byzantine army Syria has seen in a generation. And for most of those 6 days, every soldier who looks at it will feel the same thing that man feels tonight. Relief. An enemy cannot come from the west. The cliffs make sure of that. A wall no one built, doing a wall's job better than stone ever could. Remember that feeling. We'll come back to it. Not yet. The empire that sent this army was not a small one. For 6 centuries it had called itself Rome, even after Rome itself stopped being the center of anything. Its emperor, Heraclius, had spent a decade grinding down the Persian Empire in the east, a war so long and so exhausting that when it finally ended, he was too sick to celebrate it properly. Edema had swollen his legs until walking hurt. He would send this army to reclaim Syria from a new and, on paper, much smaller enemy. He would not lead it himself. Command instead fell to a patchwork of men who did not fully trust one another. A field commander named Vahan, an Armenian general with battlefield experience, but no emperor standing behind him in person. A patrician named Gregory, holding the right flank, proud and combative. Generals named Canatir and Derjan holding the center. And out in front, screening the whole army as its eyes and ears, a vanguard of light cavalry commanded by an Arab Christian king named Jabalah. Allied troops, foederati, fighting for Rome but answering, in the end, to their own king first. Facing them, an army perhaps a third the size, maybe less. Historians still argue about the real numbers on both sides. The sources that survive were often written generations later, by men with their own reasons to make one force look larger and the other smaller. What is not disputed is who commanded the smaller force. His name was Khalid ibn al Walid, and he had not come to Yarmouk by accident. He had chosen this ground. Khalid's withdrawal to Yarmouk looked, from a distance, like retreat. His forces had pushed deep into Syria over the past 2 years, taking Damascus, pressing toward the coast, moving faster than anyone expected an army out of Arabia to move. Then, with Heraclius's new expedition gathering in the north, Khalid pulled every unit back. He gave up ground. He gave up cities his men had already bled for. He did this on purpose. The plateau beyond the Yarmouk River was not a place to hide. It was a place to choose, open, undulating land, ideal for horsemen who needed room to wheel and regroup, and bordered, almost accidentally, by that same deep ravine his enemy would later find so comforting. Khalid did not build the trap. Syria had already carved it millions of years before either army existed. He simply recognized it, walked his smaller force into position beside it, and waited for a larger force, the exact size of which no 2 ancient chroniclers can quite agree on, to walk in beside him. Here's the part nobody tells you about sieges and set-piece battles. The ground usually decides more than the generals do. Khalid understood the ground. Heraclius, sick in his palace hundreds of miles away, understood a map. While both armies settled into position, a second, quieter maneuver was already underway. One that would matter more than anything that happened in the open field. Somewhere along the western gorge, a single bridge crossed the ravine at a place called ibn al-Dhakar. It was narrow, it was old, stone worn smooth by generations of traders and shepherds who had no idea it would matter to history. And it was, as far as most of the Byzantine command seemed to know, unremarkable, one crossing point among many, guarded loosely if at all. Khalid sent a cavalry officer named Durar with 500 horsemen out into the dark. They moved at night, hooves wrapped or muffled against loose stone, swinging wide around the northern edge of the Byzantine position, guided in part by a Christian Arab deserter who knew the ground better than either army's mapmakers. By morning, the bridge at ibn al-Dhakar belonged to Khalid's men. Nobody on the Byzantine side seemed to notice what had actually happened. A single crossing, changing hands quietly, while thousands of soldiers on both sides prepared for a very different kind of fight in the morning. It would take days before anyone understood what that bridge really meant. Not 500 horsemen capturing a river crossing, not a minor skirmish in the dark. It meant that the western route, the one route out through that protective ravine, no longer belonged to the men who thought they were protected by it. So here's where things stand after day one, and it's worth pausing on this, because the pattern is the whole story. A Byzantine army that outnumbers its enemy, possibly by a wide margin, the exact ratio disputed, the impression of overwhelming force not disputed at all. A defensive position that looks strong on every side. And underneath all of that, quietly, two things already slipping away before the real fighting has even started. A single bridge, and the illusion that the ravine behind them is a wall instead of a question mark. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel exists for exactly this kind of story. The moment when strength on paper stops meaning strength on the ground. Subscribe if that's the kind of history you want more of, and drop a comment with what you think happens next. We're about to find out if you're right, because days 2, 3, and 4 are where the Byzantine army starts finding out the hard way. Day 2 opens with cavalry, because that's what the Byzantine command still believes will win this. Heavy horsemen, armored, disciplined, charging across the plain in an attempt to break Khalid's line before it can settle into any kind of rhythm. It doesn't work. Khalid's cavalry doesn't meet these charges head-on. It doesn't need to. Smaller, faster units peel away from contact, circle, strike from the side, and vanish before the heavier Byzantine horsemen can turn and respond. It's frustrating in a very specific way. The kind of frustration that comes from swinging at something that keeps refusing to be where your sword lands. Byzantine officers push their men forward again and again. Each charge costs them men and horses. Each charge leaves Khalid's force largely untouched. Day 3 looks almost identical. Day 4 too. Men's lips crack in the August heat. Water runs low in some units before others. A pattern is setting in that should worry anyone paying attention. The larger army is spending itself against a smaller one that barely seems to be spending anything at all. There's a detail buried in all of this that's easy to miss, and it matters more than any single cavalry charge. Out at the front of the Byzantine formation, screening the whole army, rides a vanguard of light cavalry under a king named Jabalah. These are Ghassanid Arabs, Christian, allied to Rome for generations, fighting under Byzantine command against an army that shares their language and, in some cases, their blood relatives. Rome's eyes on this battlefield belong to Arabs, so does the enemy. It's the kind of detail a documentary usually skips, because it doesn't fit neatly into Rome versus the Arabs. But foederati like Jabalah's men were never simply extensions of Roman will. They fought under Roman pay and Roman command, yes, but their loyalty ran through their own king first, and everyone on that field on both sides understood the difference. An alliance built on payment and convenience behaves differently under pressure than an alliance built on shared cause. Nobody has tested which one this is yet. They're about to. Meanwhile, above the fighting, the Byzantine command structure is its own quiet disaster. Vahan holds overall field command, but he doesn't hold it the way a single general holds an army. Gregory commands the right flank and answers to no one easily. Conatir and Dairjan hold the center, each with his own reputation to protect. Heraclius, the one man whose word might have unified them, is 200 miles away, swollen-legged and sick, reachable only by messenger, days behind whatever is actually happening on the ground. On the other side of the field, a very different arrangement. Abu Ubaidah ibn al holds the official title of overall commander, appointed by the caliph himself. And Abu Ubaidah does something almost unheard of in military command. He lets Khalid make the decisions. Not out of weakness, out of trust, one army has 5 men who each believe they know best. The other has 1 man everyone has agreed to listen to. By the 5th day, both sides are exhausted enough to stop. No major action, torn tents get patched, broken spear shafts get replaced. Wounded men are carried back from the line and laid in whatever shade the camp offers. Just 2 armies resting a few miles apart, nursing wounds, waiting. It's the kind of pause that feels like relief. It isn't. Day 6 begins the way a lot of ancient battles began. With a challenge. Gregory, still holding the Byzantine right, rides out alone and calls for single combat. It's an old custom, older than either army, a way of testing an enemy's nerve before the real killing starts. Abu Ubaidah accepts the challenge himself. The 2 men meet in the open ground between the armies, in front of thousands of soldiers who have gone very quiet. Gregory dies in that duel. It's a small moment, 1 man against 1 man, over in minutes. But watch what it does to everyone watching. The Byzantine right flank just lost the general standing at its head, in full view of his own troops, before a single formation has moved. Morale doesn't collapse all at once. It cracks first quietly, in a place nobody can point to. Khalid doesn't wait for that crack to heal. He pulls together nearly every mounted unit he has. Roughly 8,000 horsemen, the largest concentration of cavalry either side has fielded in 6 days of fighting, and drives them, as one mass, straight at what remains of the Byzantine cavalry. Not a probing charge, not another hit-and-run raid like the ones from day 2. A single, overwhelming strike meant to do one thing: clear every Byzantine horseman off the field entirely. It works, and here's what that actually means, in practical terms, not dramatic ones. An army without its cavalry is an army without eyes, without a shield on its flanks, without any fast way to react to whatever happens next. The Byzantine infantry, still enormous, still disciplined, is now standing in the open, with nothing screening its sides. Khalid turns his infantry and what remains of his cavalry toward the Byzantine left flank and pushes. The direction matters, west, toward the ravine. This is not a story about numbers on a battlefield. This is not a story about one duel, or one cavalry charge, or one clever flanking move. This is a story about a wall turning into a door, and then into a drop, in the space of a single afternoon. Remember that ravine, the one that felt like protection on the first night. the one every soldier looked at and felt safe beside. The bridge across it, at Ain al-Dhakar, has belonged to Khalid's men since the second night of the battle. Nobody in the Byzantine command ever fully understood that, or if a few did, there was nothing left to do about it by day 6. As the Byzantine left buckles and the retreat begins, men don't run toward safety. They run toward the only ground they know, west, toward the cliffs, because that is where an army instinctively runs when its flank collapses and its cavalry is gone and its commanders are dead or scattered. A wind picks up that afternoon, thick with sand, blowing directly into Byzantine faces as they fall back. A small thing. It matters anyway. Men squinting, stumbling, unable to see more than a few feet ahead while trying to cross broken ground at the edge of a 200-meter drop. Some find the narrow paths down, most don't. Soldiers go over the edge in groups, pushed by the press of bodies behind them rather than any single blow. Horses go with them, screaming in a way that carries over even the noise of the retreat. The gorge that had sat quietly at the edge of the battlefield for 5 days, doing nothing, asking nothing, becomes the largest single cause of death in the entire battle. Think about a room you've stood in that felt safe simply because you could see the exit. Now imagine standing in that same room and discovering, only at the worst possible moment, that the exit had been quietly locked days earlier, and you never checked. Vahan doesn't survive the collapse. Neither do most of the men who followed him into that final retreat. By the time the fighting stops, Byzantine control of Syria has stopped with it. So what actually happened at Yarmouk? Not a small army beating a big one through luck. Not a miracle, a 6-day sequence of small compounding advantages. A bridge taken quietly on the second night, a screening cavalry that never got tested until it was too late, a command structure split 5 ways facing one that trusted a single man completely, and a piece of terrain that meant 2 completely different things, depending on which direction you were running. Here's the first truth worth sitting with. Byzantium didn't lose Syria because its soldiers were weak or its numbers were small. The numbers, whatever they actually were, favored Rome. What decided Yarmouk was mobility, coordination, and a terrain trap that only one side understood was a trap at all. Here's the second truth, and this one's for you, not just for the history books. Safety you haven't checked yourself isn't safety. It's just the absence of a problem you haven't found yet. The Byzantine soldiers who felt relief looking at that ravine on day 1 weren't wrong to feel relieved. They were wrong to stop looking. And here's the last one, the one that actually stays with you. An empire that had ruled Syria for 600 years lost it in 6 days at a river most people alive today couldn't point to on a map. Vahan is barely a footnote now. Khalid is a legend. The difference between the two of them wasn't really about swords or horses at all. It was about who understood the ground they were standing on, and who simply assumed it would hold. So here's the question. Of everything in this battle, the bridge, the sandstorm, the silence of day 5, the duel that opened the final collapse, which detail hit you hardest? Tell me below, because 6 days changed the map of the entire Middle East. And it started with one man looking at a cliff and feeling safe.